Hello. Today I'd like to visit with you for a few minutes about the thinking process and organization process that will be very helpful for you when you're starting to write your review and analysis papers and when you're working on this building skills paper. It's important to remember that, first of all, the more time you spend with the sources that you choose, the better, because you'll get immersed in them and you will become very familiar with the information that you find. That will help you not only learn about the issue that you're investigating, but it will help you organize the information better so that as you go about the process of reviewing them and making comparisons and contrasts, you'll know those sources very, very well. So that's number one. The more you engage in the practice of searching the literature and organizing it so that you can analyze it, the better you'll be. And it will be the skill that you will use all the way through the graduate program, but every other aspect of your teaching career, because you'll be able to solve novel problems that you've never seen before using this process. So that's why it's so important. Another important thing to remember about this course is that it isn't about getting the right answer in this course. There isn't a right answer in any of this, but the important piece of it is to gain the skill and to practice the kind of critical reasoning and ways of working with the evidence in order to find a better solution. Remember the video that you watched about dialectic thinking? That's what I'm talking about here. So if you're going to get to best practice in dialectic thinking, you have to know how to immerse yourself in the sources and then to organize it. So today it's all about organization. And there are lots of different ways to organize things. Now, what you need to remember in this course and in any further course when you're trying to find a better solution, when you're trying to engage in dialectic thinking, is that it's not a report. You're not going to be doing a report. A report reminds me actually of getting into a, payloader and going to one pile and picking up some dirt. And then you go to another place and pick up some dirt and another place and maybe 5 or 6 places. And you get it all in your scoop and then you bring it to a central location and you plop it right there and you say, there you go. To which I would look at you and say, so what? What is this? And you'll say, well, I did the research and here it is. Well, you've just wasted a lot of time because in the form that it's in, there's nothing you can do with that research. Nothing. And that's where people start writing a report and that they take source number 1 and they tell about it. Source number 2, they tell about it. Source number 3, however many sources. And at the end, all they have is a list of stuff that can't be used for anything because you didn't analyze it. You didn't compare and contrast. You didn't see what's the meaning here. What do they say? How do they compare with one another? How can I use this information to arrive at a solution or a thesis that's better than where we are now? That's what we want to do in this course. There's always a process to that. And it's actually called the research cycle. It's been around for quite a few years, actually. And it's gaining the skill in that cycle that will hone your skills in being a dialectic thinker and being able to bring other people in your group, in your school district, along with you as you attempt to arrive at better solutions. So I wanted to give you an example today of what you can do and how to go about that thinking process. So many times I've asked students, or I've told students, organize your work by the topics that rise up as you're reading. And even though I can't see them, I can see the glare in their eye, like, what are you talking about? So a couple of days ago, I decided to show you my thought process. Now, I didn't use an issue from the text. there was a question I had that I thought, well, I'd like to have the answer to that, so I'll use this as an example. The important thing to remember is that it's not any one system. I organize mine. I'll show you that in a minute. It's not pretty, and it doesn't have to be. I organize mine by nodes. You can use Venn diagrams. You can use a grid. You can go, if you're techie and you like to do that, Prezi is a really good thing to use because you can use it to organize, and it is easy to add things to it. You're going to see on mine, I ran out of room, and it got skewed off a little bit, but it got the information that I needed, and it gave it to me. I now have it in a format where I can synthesize it. So my questions were, should students return full-time face-to-face to school? Because that's a hot topic right now during the pandemic. Secondly, I wanted to know about the impacts of long-term school closure and digital learning on academics. I wanted to know about the social, emotional, and psychological impacts. And I wanted to know about best practice operations for opening schools safely. And so that's what I started with. I also started with what I know. Now be careful here, because sometimes the things you think you know are actually your preconceived assumptions. Don't go there. Make sure that what you say you know is a fact. So I knew, and I just wrote mine on a little yellow sticky note, if you will. Now, whoa, backwards. I wrote down, I know that the Chicago Teachers Union, I know about their actions. I know that they are striking at this point in time because they don't want to go back to school face-to-face. I know that the St. Paul Teachers Union did the same thing. What I also know is that when I read everything I could find about what they've published and put out, number one, there's nothing about kids. And number two, there is not one reference to research. It's all based on opinion, no research. I also wanted to know, or I also know already, that there are access with students who live in rural or more isolated areas having access to enough broadband to use digital or online learning. I also know that there are challenges for students living in poverty and in low SES locations. I already knew that. So I wrote those down so that I could say, okay, this is my background knowledge that I have. Now where do I want to go? I chose 5 sources, and I chose to number them so that I could arrange them better on my chart. I chose 2 sources specifically about academics, 1 source specifically about social, emotional, and psychological impacts, and then another source about these social, emotional impacts, and then the 5th source was on operating schools safely in a face-to-face setting. So as I read all of those, I began to see that they kind of came in, they were organized by, okay, these are talking mainly about academics. These are talking about the social, emotional, psychological issues. And of course, then there's the one that finally talks about operating safely. I put that one kind of last. As I started reading these sources, I noticed that, and this is my organizer. Now remember, it doesn't have to be pretty, and this one is not pretty. However, what it did for me was to organize my thinking. So as I started reading about academics, whoa, this is just hard to do. Academics, I could see that the sources were divided into reading, math, kids with special needs, and then they also addressed inequities. So as I started reading, I took notes. and I wrote on my notes, I could write about what they discovered about the difference in reading scores before and after school closures, and what they found for math scores and what they found for special needs. As I wrote down the information I found, I just coded it with source number 1, number 2, number 3, because then I wasn't rewriting the name of the authors or the source each time. Interestingly enough, it gave me the information I needed to compare and contrast. For example, both sources 1 and 2 talked about 2019 scores compared to 2018 scores. Then they broke it up further into grades 1 and 2, and then grades 3 to 8. And both of the sources did that. So I can compare those two. They did the same thing for math. Then with inequity, I found that sources 1, 2, and 3 all talked about the inequity between low SES, high SES, between Black students, white students, between rural students and urban students. This was fascinating. Then I looked at the source for social, emotional, and psychological, and I found that they arranged it grades 3 through 6, at preschool to grade 2, then grades 3 through 6, and then older students. It was interesting, and this was source 4, how source 4 also had some things to say about academics. They also had things to say about inequity. They talked about the fact that many of the emotional impact characteristics that they found were more prevalent in low SES students. So you can see how I organize this. The reason for this is when I write my review and analysis, I can now write by topic. I'm going to divide a paper saying this is the academics, and I'm going to compare source 1, source 2, and sometimes source 3 on reading, math, inequities, students with special needs. That was another one that actually sources 1 through 4 all commented on. So as you write your paper then, in that review and analysis section, you're not going to write source 1 said this, source 2 said this, source 3 said this. No, that doesn't get you anywhere. That's taking the pile of dirt and putting it in the middle. What you're going to do is say something about reading skills, and then talk about source 1, and this was supported by or contradicted by source 2. And then go through and discuss, compare and contrast your sources. That, ladies and gentlemen, is how you write a scholarly analysis, so that when you end up, when you've talked about your topics, which are the academic impacts, the social emotional impacts, and of long-term school closures, then you can compare and contrast. You can actually make a decision then. You can say, based on the information and analysis, my position is this. And then, of course, we're not going to talk about it here because I've kept you long enough. Then you'll go about stating your position and then supporting that position. And actually what I decided after I read source number 5, which was the operating safely, that really is a source that I would use to support my position. So I wouldn't use source number 5 in the review and analysis section. I would choose to use that in the supporting my position, which by now you can guess what that would be. So my point is then, that's how you get to the point of being able to compare and contrast. You can only do it if you organize it and then indicate, oh, here's the topic that came up in 4 different sources. So I'm going to talk about that topic, and then I'm going to talk about those sources under that topic as I'm writing. So my topics then in my review and analysis will end up being reading and math, grades K2 through 6 in high school, special needs students, the equity issues, and the social emotional impacts. Those are all going to be topics in that review and analysis section. And after I've done the review and analysis and kept adding to it, which is why it started to look like this because I ran out of room, and that's okay. Then you make your decision. What is it that the evidence has shown me? What's the data that supports the evidence that supports the warrant, or that warrants the position? State that, and then I can go on writing the rest of my paper, which will be my position and supporting my position with more sources, which is why I said I decided to use that operating safely as a source that will support that. And I would have to look up, of course, and do some more research there. So this is the kind of process, thought process, you need to engage in so that you can be successful not only in this class and writing these papers, but from now on, as you engage in problem solving with your school districts, that's how you do it. Don't be one of those pick up the dirt and move it to the middle and smush it together because you get nowhere. That's too much time to spend to do that. So I hope that this has helped you to see how to search the literature, how to think about the sources that you've chosen, how to start out with your question. And so, of course, the purpose for this particular paper would have been, the purpose for this review and analysis is to determine if schools should open full-time face-to-face. You're not going to determine how to do it. That's not the whole purpose. You may discover that at the end, but the purpose isn't to review, to define, to find out more about, or a how question. Remember, your purpose needs to be debatable. It's an issue. And obviously, the question, should students return to school face-to-face full-time, that is debatable. So, thank you for spending the time with me. My goal was 10 minutes. Sorry, I'm over by 7. But I know that this is valuable and I want to spend the time. So think back about the dialectic thinking video, look at this one, and then write your first try at building the skills for the review and analysis. Best of luck.